Ecclesiastes chapter 3 opens with a sentence almost everyone has heard. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. Most people read that as comfort, as reassurance, as a way of saying, don't worry, things will change eventually. But that's only half of what Solomon was actually saying. The other half, the part that almost nobody preaches, is the warning built into the same verse. Because if there is a time for everything, then there is also a time that is not for everything. There is a right response for a given season, and there is a wrong response for a given season. And using the wrong response in the wrong season doesn't just fail to produce results. In the Bible, it actually extends the season. It makes it longer, sometimes by years. Israel's journey from Egypt to Canaan should have taken 11 days. 11 days. Deuteronomy 1:2 tells us that. There was a direct route. God knew it. The distance wasn't the problem. The problem was that a generation of people kept applying harvest season energy to a wilderness season reality. They demanded the fruit of the promised land while they were still in the preparation of the desert, and the season did not end until they either learned what the season required or were replaced by a generation that would. Most of the pain people experience in a season isn't caused by the season itself. It's caused by the mismatch between what the season requires and what they're doing inside it. So the question I want to answer today is not, when will your season end? The question is, what season are you actually in right now? And more importantly, what does that season require from you? Before we go through the seasons, I need to establish the framework that makes sense of all of them. In the ancient world, farmers understood something modern people have largely forgotten. You cannot rush a season. You cannot harvest in January and plant in September and expect the field to cooperate. Each season has its own logic, its own requirements, and its own rewards, but only when those requirements are met on the season's terms, not yours. The Bible uses this agricultural reality to describe spiritual life from Genesis to Revelation. Genesis 8:22. God's covenant after the flood includes the promise. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Seed time and harvest. Not harvest and then seed time. The order is fixed. You cannot reverse it. Galatians 6-9 captures what breaks most people. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. The phrase is due season, not our preferred season. The due season, the one that comes after the requirements of the prior seasons have been met. With that framework in place, here are the 4 seasons you will move through in your spiritual life and how to identify which one you are in right now. The first season is the planting season, and it is the most misread season in the Bible. Here is what a planting season looks like from the inside. Nothing visible is happening. You are putting things in the ground, effort, faithfulness, obedience, prayer, and there is no evidence yet that any of it is taking root. The field looks the same before and after you plant. You cannot see the seed growing. All you have is the act of planting and the promise that the seed will eventually produce. Abraham's departure from Ur is the clearest picture of a planting season in all of Scripture. God told Abraham to leave his country, his kindred, and his father's house for a land God would show him. Genesis 12:1. He didn't give him a destination. He gave him a direction. Go, and Abraham went. He left behind everything familiar, his community, his culture, his language, his security, and walked into a promise he could not yet see. That departure was a seed. He planted faith into ground he couldn't yet see would ever produce anything. And in the planting season, that is all you are asked to do. Here is the mistake most people make in a planting season. They evaluate the season by the absence of visible fruit. They plant for a week and look for a harvest at the end of it. When nothing has grown yet, they conclude the seed is dead, the promise was wrong, or God has abandoned them. So they stop planting, and the very season that was about to produce something gets interrupted before it could. There is a diagnostic for whether you are in a planting season. In a planting season, God tends to ask you to do things whose results you cannot see yet. He tends to ask for faithfulness in small things before the assignment is revealed. He tends to ask you to go before he shows you where. If you find yourself in a season where nothing seems to be growing, yet where you are doing what's right, but the fruit hasn't shown up, do not interpret the invisible as inactive. The seed is in the ground. The question is whether you will keep planting or demand the harvest before the season is ready to give it. The second season is the wilderness season, and it is the season most people are desperately trying to escape. A wilderness season is characterized by one thing. You are being formed, not deployed, not rewarded, formed. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian herding sheep on the backside of the desert before God spoke to him from the burning bush. Those 40 years were not wasted. They were the making of the man who would stand before Pharaoh without flinching. They were the development of a shepherd's patience and a shepherd's knowledge of the wilderness terrain, skills Moses would need to lead 2 million people through the very same desert for another 40 years. But here is the crucial distinction about the wilderness season that nobody tells you. It is not the same as the punishment season Israel experienced. 2 different groups of people were in the wilderness at the same time. Moses was in the wilderness being prepared. Israel, the generation that left Egypt, was in the wilderness being disciplined for refusing to trust God at the border of Canaan. Same geography. Completely different seasons, completely different reasons, completely different outcomes. This is why discernment in the wilderness season matters so much. You need to know whether your wilderness is preparation or discipline. Here is how you tell them apart. A wilderness of preparation looks like this. You are growing in character, even as circumstances remain difficult. Your dependence on God is deepening, not shallowing. The solitude, while uncomfortable, is producing something intimacy with God, clarity about your calling, a strength in your inner world that wasn't there before. This is Moses in Midian. He went in as a prince of Egypt, impulsive, confident in his own power, and he came out as a man so broken of self-reliance that when God gave him the assignment, his first response was, "I cannot speak." That brokenness was not a failure of the wilderness, it was the product of it. A wilderness of discipline looks like this. You are circling. You keep arriving at the same place, the same conflict, the same failure, not because God is preparing something new, but because something old has not been surrendered. Israel circled for 40 years, not because God had no destination for them, but because they kept returning to the same unbelief. The land was always there. The problem was always within them. The diagnostic question for the wilderness season is not how long have I been here? It is, am I growing while I wait, or am I only waiting? If you are growing, if the solitude is building something real in your character, your faith, your understanding of God, then stay faithful. You are in Moses' wilderness, not Israel's. The burning bush is coming, but it will come to the man who has spent 40 years learning the shape of the desert, not to the man who spent 40 years wishing he were somewhere else. The third season is the harvest season, and it is the most demanding season for reasons nobody warns you about. Most people imagine the harvest season as the easy part. The suffering is over, the waiting is done. Now you just receive what was promised. But in the agricultural world, harvest is the most physically intense season of the year. It is not the season of rest. It is the season of rapid, decisive, maximum effort before the crop is lost, before the weather turns, before the opportunity closes. Joseph's emergence from prison to the palace of Pharaoh is the harvest season in its most dramatic form. He had been planted in a foreign land, forced through a wilderness of slavery and imprisonment, and then, in less than 24 hours, everything changed. Pharaoh dreamed. The cupbearer remembered. Joseph was summoned, shaved, and changed his clothes. And by sundown he was the second most powerful man in the known world. What came next was not rest. The 7 years of abundance required immediate, disciplined, systematic action. Joseph had to build the granary infrastructure for an empire. He had to manage the logistics of storing 1/5 of the harvest from the most productive nation on earth. The harvest season required him to work harder than he had ever worked, but now from a position of authority, with resources, with a mandate. Here is the mistake people make in the harvest season. They treat it like a rest season. They have waited so long and worked so hard in the prior seasons that when the harvest season comes, they move slowly, cautiously, hesitantly, afraid it will be taken away again. And in doing so, they miss the window that the season was offering. The diagnostic for the harvest season. God begins opening doors faster than you can process them. Opportunities arrive in clusters. Resources show up. The connections you planted in prior seasons start bearing fruit simultaneously. The pace of movement around you accelerates. The right response in a harvest season is not caution. It is faithful urgency. Move with what God is moving. Work with the season, not against it. The farmer who oversleeps during harvest loses his crop to the rain. And there is one more thing about the harvest season that needs to be said plainly. It ends. Every harvest ends. If you try to hold on to it past its season, if you treat the harvest season as a permanent state rather than a window, you will miss the transition into what comes next. The 4th season is the one nobody wants to talk about, because it is the hardest to accept. The transition season. The season where what you were carrying is meant to be laid down, and something new is meant to begin. Moses is the person who most embodies the transition season in all of Scripture, and his story is one of the most striking in the entire Bible, not because of how it ends, but because of how he handled the ending. Moses was 120 years old. He had led Israel for 40 years through the wilderness. He had stood before Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, received the Torah, and interceded for a nation when God was ready to destroy it. He was arguably the most significant human figure in the Old Testament, and God told him he would not cross the Jordan. His season of leading Israel to Canaan was finished. Joshua would take them in. Moses did not fight it. He did not grasp for what was ending. He stood before Israel and said, "I am no longer able to go out and come in. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross over this Jordan." And then he spent his final days blessing the 12 tribes, equipping Joshua and writing down the Torah so that what God had taught him would outlast him. The transition season is not failure. It is stewardship of what came before. But here is why it is the hardest season. Nothing about it feels finished. There is always more that could be done. There is always a reason to hold on. The transition season requires something that does not come naturally to people who have carried responsibility. It requires the ability to say, "This was mine to carry for a season. It is no longer mine to carry, and I am going to help the next person carry it well." The diagnostic for the transition season is a specific kind of restlessness, not the restlessness of the wilderness season, which pulls you forward into what God is preparing. This is the restlessness of someone who is holding on to something past its season. The fruit that once came easily no longer comes. The doors that once opened freely have grown heavier. And beneath the familiar work, something in you keeps sensing, "This is not what I am supposed to be doing right now." Before I close, I need to say something carefully. This framework is not a mechanism for escaping a season you don't like, and it is not a way of explaining away your own faithlessness by calling it wilderness preparation. The seasons of God are not variables you can manipulate by labeling them correctly. Israel called themselves a people of God in the wilderness and still circled for 40 years. The label didn't change the reality. What changed the reality was the generation that actually trusted God at Kadesh Barnea. So do not use this framework to comfort yourself into passivity. Use it to get honest with yourself about what God is asking you to do in the season you are actually in, not the season you want to be in, not the season you think you deserve, but the one you are in right now. So where are you? If you are in a planting season, nothing visible yet, keep planting. The seed is not dead. The harvest cannot come from seeds that were never sown. If you are in a wilderness season, growing slowly, in the quiet place, ask honestly whether you are being prepared or disciplined. And whatever the answer, do not waste the season. What God is building in the hidden place is always proportional to what He is planning for the public one. If you are in a harvest season, doors opening, momentum building, move. Move with faithfulness and with urgency. But remember, it is a season, not a permanent condition. And if you are in a transition season, if something in you knows that what you have been carrying is meant to be released, do what Moses did. Finish well. Bless the person who comes after you. Write down what you have learned, and release what was never yours to hold forever. After God told Moses he would not cross the Jordan, He led him to the top of Mount Nebo, and from there God showed him the land, all of it, the full inheritance, the entirety of what 400 years of promise had been pointing toward. Moses saw it, he could not enter it, and Scripture says he died there, on the mountain, in the presence of God. God Himself buried him in a valley in Moab, and no one has ever found the grave. That is a strange ending by any human measure. To see the destination and not reach it. To carry the promise for 40 years and hand it to someone else at the border. But consider what Moses saw from that mountain. He saw the land that Abraham had walked through as a pilgrim, trusting a promise he would never personally inherit. He saw the land where Jacob had wrestled and wept and been broken and renamed. He saw the land where Joseph had dreamed the dreams that seemed to mock him for 13 years in a pit and a prison. And from that mountain, Moses saw that every season, every planting, every wilderness, every harvest, every transition had been leading to this exact moment, not because his season was the final one, but because his season was necessary for the next one. Your season is necessary for the next one. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever the season is asking of you, it is not random. It is not punishment. It is not God being slow or absent or indifferent. It is a season. It has a purpose, and it requires something specific from you. The question is whether you will give it.